to have with us Amber Sadowski, who is the operations manager of CHUM, a group that we've had a long-term relationship with. We also have here Marty Sadowski, who is our CHUM delegate, who probably knows the answers to questions related to the UU Church and the relationship with CHUM. I'm just going to do a very brief intro for Amber, and she can tell us more. She's been at CHUM for 3 months as the Director of Operations. Prior to that, she was the Lighthouse, what was it?
I was the education case manager for 4 years and then moved more into an admin role.
So she can explain that a little bit more. And she also has a role that I hope all of us know, that she is on the Duluth School Board as an at-large member. So she has a very full life. Plus, she told me she has 2 teenagers. And I'm so old, when I saw Amber, I thought her kids would be like this big. I guess kids grow up or something. Anyway, it's a pleasure to have you here, Amber. And Amber, as I said, would like this to be a casual conversation. So that's the way we're going to keep it. And we can, if you want the questions as we go along, we can do that. Otherwise, we usually take them at the end.
Sounds good. I welcome questions, and I am fine with questions during or after. Yeah, and just very glad to be here today. I've always wanted to come to this church. I've always been curious when I've driven by, and I was so amazed when I came in and saw all the beautiful plants. It's so beautiful. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time going a little slower out the door so I could take in all of those plants. But thank you for the great introduction, Sally. Yeah, I don't have too much more to add to that. I feel like my kids were just this little, but now they're very big teenagers. So yeah, I was at Lighthouse for 7 years. Before that, I actually ran my own business. I was a stay-at-home mom and did in-home childcare because I wanted to be with them when they were young. And now a lot of those kids are way taller than me, and it's really been a joy seeing them grow up and kind of move through our educational systems here in Duluth. And then at Lighthouse, I was the teacher education case manager for 4 years. And then I was the development director for a little bit, and then worked with our finance director. So it gave me a really kind of wide lens into nonprofit work. I'm really thankful for the time that I spent as the education case manager. It's actually what formed my it was really the core of my decision to run for school board in the first place, just because I wanted to make sure that there was someone on the board, you know, that even though I haven't experienced that, I walked with them on their educational journeys as they navigated a lot of different systems. So, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. CHUM. I'm so thankful to be at CHUM. I've been here at CHUM for 3 months. And so it's really nice to be here today in a welcoming, kind of safe, smaller environment, because this is my first time talking about CHUM. And so if there's questions that I can't answer today, I will write them down and I can make sure I get you those answers, or maybe Marty can help fill in the gaps a little bit. So I'm the operations director at CHUM, and that can mean a lot of different things at a lot of different places. But I am excited to kind of build in some more like organizational structures within CHUM internally. I'm excited to support staff. I'm doing a little bit of HR and hiring since starting at CHUM. Eventually I'll be in the admin office, but right now I'm housed at Steve O'Neill because, like many places in our community right now, whether it's our educational systems or businesses or even the county, everyone is having a hard time kind of hiring. And there was some transition there at Steve O'Neill. So I've been onboarding new family coaches, hired a new community engagement coordinator. One thing that struck me about CHUM is that there's some people that have worked there for a really long time. And I think that says something about the quality of an organization. And so Mary Lou Larson had been at CHUM for 20 years, and she recently retired. And so I'm really honored to have worked with her for a little bit. And then we replaced her, and that person will start on Monday. So I've been doing a lot of different things at CHUM since I've been there. A little bit about the history of CHUM. CHUM was founded in 1973 when 10 churches in the Central Hillside neighborhood kind of came together to pool the resources together to help those in need, those who are low income at that time. And so even if you're not good at math like me, you may do the math and say, yep, this is our 50th anniversary this year that we're celebrating at CHUM. So I'm really excited to be a part of that. We'll have different, we're going to be celebrating it throughout the year. And so make sure to come to Rhubarb Festival, and there will be other activities and events throughout the year to kind of celebrate that work. But really, faith communities were the core of starting CHUM, Churches United in Ministry. And now today there's, I wasn't able to make it to the last assembly because I was at a school board meeting, but around 44 different faith communities. That's huge. And you're the core of really all that we do at CHUM. It was what started it. And we really rely on volunteering, in-kind donations, financial contributions, and then even encouragement, just walking in today and just being welcome like I was. And the other day I got a letter from someone at another faith community just saying thank you for what you're doing. I had never met that person, but it really meant a lot because the people at CHUM, our staff work very, very hard, and they do very hard work. And that was very thoughtful. So, and then I know a lot of our faith communities also do advocacy work, some of them, and we really appreciate that. And then another way that I think our faith communities kind of help is just paying attention to the story around people that are experiencing homelessness. I think there's a lot of stereotypes out there and misconceptions. And so working as you're talking to people in our community, kind of changing that story. Let's see, I could talk about, do you want me to talk about CHUM, all of our different programs, or would you prefer I kind of jump into stepping on up right now?
I think cover
the programs. Okay. Sure. So very good. Yeah. So obviously one of our main programs is our emergency shelter, the drop-in center. We have 80 beds, and we served about 1,300 individuals last year between our shelter and then the warming center. And even if we don't have a bed for them, we let anyone in who needs a place to get out of the cold. And so at the shelter, we serve meals. We give out basic necessities. We have a nurse, and then we have Sunny, who I've seen her help manage meds, just do basic wound care. We connect people to case managers in the drop-in center. They can get their mail. We help them connect to benefits and, get on housing lists if they're ready. So that's a little bit about our drop-in center. It just does so much. Question.
Could you describe just a little bit the difference between the warming place, the shelter, and the drop-in? Those are three different separate places.
Sure. So the warming centers came about just because the capacity at our shelter is way over capacity. And so we have congregate shelter, like dormitory style, at the drop-in center for single adults. And then at the warming centers in our community, there's not necessarily beds, but I know that they have mats that they can rest on, and they can get food and get out of the cold. So
I was at
sorry for interrupting. I think we'll need the mic so folks can hear the questions, I think.
Perfect.
just wondering about the state of housing for homeless families. What kind of bed? I think I heard that there was a definite shortage of that. So,
yeah, that's a really good question. I don't have exact numbers, but just given the amount of folks who are experiencing homelessness and those people that are waiting, it can take 2 years to get into a permanent supportive housing situation. And so I would imagine that there is a need. CHUM and other organizations like Safe Haven, they do have shelters that are specifically designed for families. At Steve O'Neill, we have 50 units of housing, permanent supportive housing. 44 of them are for, for families, and then 6 of them are for shelter. And actually, Steve O'Neill is probably the only place, it is the only place in our community that can house a larger family. So think about if you were someone who had maybe 4 or 5 children. We're one of the only organizations that has the capacity to house that family. Unfortunately, what happens if there's not room is sometimes families have to be separated. And that's not a situation that we want to see happen if we can help it. And actually right now, just because of amazing donors that are out there, I think we got a bequest that was able to help us do the CHUM refresh. So we're like actually redoing, we redid the floors in the drop-in center, where we putting new lockers, and then we're going to be painting the walls. But I think also part of that bequest helped fund some of the redoing the family shelters. Steve O'Neill's been open for 7 years, so they really needed an upgrade. And I took some before and after pictures, and it's really amazing to see the difference. And it's a place where I would be proud to show anyone who came for a tour. And it's a place that I would feel comfortable housing a family. And so it's really great to see those renovations happening. Yeah. So there aren't any other questions. I can keep going. But I talked a little bit about the drop-in center. So yeah, it's more than just a place to sleep. It's a place to connect to advocates. It's a place to connect to someone who cares about you. It's a place to get your needs met. Recently we had, I think it was from the University of Minnesota Medical Center, came in and they did wound care. I may be wrong on exactly who came in, but that was really, really amazing. And they went to our warming center too. And sometimes there's a lot of distrust for good reason. People just don't have that trust. And so when they trust Sunny in the drop-in or the nurse that we have, then there's that kind of trust transfer, and they're more apt to get the care they need when someone can kind of do that handoff. And that's something that I found that is definitely rings true in this work, no matter where you're working. So, yeah.
I know there's so many levels to this homelessness problem. You know, there's the poor wounded frostbitten soul who walks in off the street. Yes. Anyway, and then there's the level of the family that shows up with the station wagon with all the kids. There's so much of the problem that's broad. Your focus is interesting, but you're being burdened. So it's quite something. Steve O'Neill seems to really help you out. Well, if they can you? Okay.
There are people on Zoom who can't.
Oh, so this will do it.
Yeah, hi everybody.
Anyway, it just seems like such a broad problem for you, and the funding seems to be so terraced. We can support you if the family's only earning this much money, and puts the house here, and then this organization will fund you from the other side. I gotta think it's just a real daily struggle.
Yeah, funding is definitely a complicated piece of what we do for sure. And so our foundational support from local foundation grants, you know, that's a piece of it. Advocacy to the state. Trying to think of pathways for home. The Pathways for Home Act is part of our advocacy platform right now that we're pushing at the state level, because that would give money significant money for shelter capital and then emergency services program grants. But you're right. Even if that gets passed and there's that funding, it's going to take a while to get to CHUM because a lot of organizations will be applying for those grants. And so, yeah, it is a complicated piece, but I feel like we're very supported at CHUM. We have a really great development staff. We have a great finance director. And we work, part of, to answer the other part of your question, or comment, I should say, about just meeting everyone's needs. That's one of the guiding principles of stepping on up is everyone deserves a safe and affordable place to call home that is appropriate, right, for their specific cultural and developmental needs. And so that's a component of it, taking into account the things you were just talking about as far as meeting people's needs where they're at. If they're a family, if they're a single adult, if maybe there's other specific needs they have, whether it's chemical dependency or mental health, or maybe it's connecting to culture in some way, right? That could help them, or spirituality. So.
Can I make a couple of comments? I made some notes, when Kathy asked about, the warming centers as different shelter. On Tuesday night at the quarterly assembly, I sat at a table with a couple who were volunteering at the warming center. And they talked about their experience as being entirely positive, and they went in the evening as people came to the warming centers, and then went back in the mornings just once a week. As people would be at the warming center, those who take advantage of the warming center do have to go in the morning or 8. And I know that we were one of the first, CHUM was one of the first shelters. Now I'm talking about the overnight shelter on what street is it? Second Street. To be a low barrier shelter. And that means that if one is intoxicated or under the influence, you can still be there if you are not, if your behavior is not inappropriate to others. And that was a real breakthrough. This happened during the pandemic. It was so much chaos everywhere. The other thing I would say is one of the things I like the best about CHUM is that we're incorporated as Churches United in Ministry, but we changed the name of the organization to just CHUM, and that's in all of the identity and the logo and everything. It's just CHUM, and that's what was one of the factors that helped Temple Israel join. And on Tuesday night, we voted, of course, to have 2 or 3 new congregations, including the Greek Orthodox. Is that 12 Holy Apostles? All right, I'll shut up.
How does the church apply?
Your governing body of the congregation needs to just write a letter, CHUM, and have support. And there's a lot asked of a church, if you're going to be a member, please help us, please support us. So they're looking for, okay, now I'm truly shutting up.
This is great. Thank you.
June 4th, 1973, the actual date, the incorporation date was filed, and there is to be an interfaith service. And I don't know where, I don't think that's established. And so that will be a real highlight. And we hope to publish a commemorative publication, slip magazine sometimes.
How does it fit into churches that,
Mr. Munger, excuse me.
well, how does it fit that the Jewish community comes into it when you say churches? Is that,
That's why we changed the
Yeah.
name to just CHUM. Even though apparently we can't change it on the corporation.
You're doing business as.
Yeah, doing business as.
Was UUCD in them?
Absolutely. For separate work, yeah.
Thank you, Marty. I really appreciate you chiming in there. So, like I said, I've been at CHUM for 3 months, so there's still things that I maybe haven't heard. And so I really appreciate you bringing that up, and especially I appreciate that you brought up that we're a low barrier shelter, because I think that's really important. If we're practicing harm reduction, we're meeting people where they're at. And if they're still dependent upon drugs or, facing addictions and that sort of thing, we want to meet them where they're at. And we're not meeting them where they're at if we're not giving them shelter, if they're still on drugs, right? So we would still want them to be safe, right? So they can come to the shelter, and I'm glad you pointed that out, as long as they're on good behavior. I mean, we're not allowing people to do drugs at the shelter, but if they come maybe under the influence, but they're just gonna go to bed and, get a meal and have water the next day, that person's gonna be a lot better off, and we're reducing the harm that could happen to them and connecting them to resources as well. And so to Richard's question earlier, kind of meeting people where they're at, I would say it would be nice at some point to have a shelter that's low barrier, and then maybe a shelter that's high barrier, so that if I have recovered from my addiction and I've addressed some of my mental health concerns and things like that, maybe being at a drop-in center where it's low barrier isn't the best place for me. I could be triggered, or maybe I'm just not comfortable in that anymore. But I can't, maybe I don't have the resources to get my own apartment yet. And so maybe there's another shelter that I could go to, right, where this is my bunk, this is my locker, I'm working, and maybe CHUM could help me save money to get my own apartment. So that could be something that we look at in the future. So really taking into account everyone's needs and meeting them where they're at. So that's our drop-in center. And then I want to make sure to leave time to talk about stepping that up. Did you have a quick question?
A quick question.
Yeah.
How do people get to these places?
So that's a good question. I think that at CHUM, a lot of it is referrals from friends. Also, our community has, our coordinated entry system. So if you are experiencing homelessness, you can dial 211 and get connected to resources that way. Also, all the social service agencies in Duluth, I think that they do a really good job working together, and we try not to duplicate services. So for example, if the Damiano is serving a meal at this time, CHUM will serve one at this time, and another organization will serve one at this time. And so we really work collaboratively, but I think those are some of the ways that people find their way to our services.
And then physically.
Oh, physically?
Yeah.
Well, we do give bus passes out, I know, at CHUM, and so do other organizations. So I think that's probably the main way that people can get to us, or walking.
We need to applaud DTA then.
Absolutely, they're another community partner in this work as well.
Do the police ever bring people who need shelter?
Actually, yes, they do. So thank you. And then, so police, social workers, we had a social worker the other day or a couple weeks ago, bring someone in, a young person actually that their parents kind of booted them, and we gave them a place to stay for a couple nights, and then help them connect to maybe more appropriate resources for that person.
But not to overlook the enforcement police in spite of their bad reputation.
Right, no, they're another community partner, and when I have talked to different people in our community about stepping on up, which I kind of skipping ahead to, but it's definitely going to be a huge collaboration, not only between different nonprofits and social service agencies and the government and the city and the county, but also our police department, our fire department. Oftentimes our fire department they're our first responders, and they will be the first ones on site if there's an encampment somewhere, and so they're the first people on site, and then who does the cleanup, right? So we need to work together as a community to kind of address some of these ongoing barriers to getting housed, I guess. But I was going to talk a little bit about street outreach. You know, we have Deb Holman and then others who do street outreach. They serve about 150 to 200 people a year. And so, like I said, sometimes some people are, for one reason or another, a little apprehensive about coming to the drop-in center. And so Deb and others are making those connections. They're building trust. They're connecting them to resources. They're meeting their basic needs. And then they're working to connect them to other people in our organization that can connect them to stabilized housing, get them on the coordinated entry list, kind of work to get them housed. And like I said, that can take a long time sometimes. So it's good to do it sooner rather than later. They also reduce contact with police, work collaboratively with our police, right? And then advocate for and with them as they need. So that's what our street outreach does. And then we also have our distributed services, which is our food shelf. We give away thousands of pounds of food per year. I don't have the exact stats, but Scott does an amazing job. And they also do CHUM to go boxes, which I think it's once a month. They pack up these Super One boxes and they fill them with food and kind of bring them to people who need them in the community. One place they bring them is actually the Steve O'Neill apartments. And so we coordinate with Scott up at Steve O'Neill and make sure that those boxes get into the hands of families that need that food. So our other two programs are, well, our housing program consists of the Steve O'Neill apartments, which I talked a little bit about, 44 permanent supportive housing units, 6 shelter. We collaborate with Center City Housing on that. They're another nonprofit. They're the owner and they do the property management. And CHUM, we do all of the supportive services. So we have 3 family coach positions. We have 2 right now, and we're hiring for another one. And those family coaches, they support families in staying housed. They advocate for families as they're navigating systems. They support families with their personal goals. They connect families to resources in the community. They offer research-based parenting supports and programming. Our family coaches are licensed in circles of security, as is our early childhood family education teachers. So we offer daycare on site as well. And I'm really proud of that daycare since I had done daycare. And when I walked into Steve O'Neill, that was one of the first things that struck me. They have the top parent aware rating in the state. They not only provide the care, but they do their licensing. We have an amazing ECFE staff there, and parents are able to bring their children there to get childcare and then work on things that maybe they want to work on, right? Maybe they want to go to therapy. Maybe they're working. Maybe they just need a break because they're a single mom, and being a single mom is really, really hard. So whatever it takes, that's why they're there for them. And then we have our community engagement coordinator who we have the Second Harvest food truck that comes. So the community engagement coordinator kind of helps with getting food to the community. So getting food off the food truck, sorting it, and then we bring it out into the lobby, and families can come get that food all day. And children will sometimes come get food when they get off the bus and bring it to their families. So that's pretty fun to see. And then the community engagement coordinator also, we have a garden out there and works just to build relationship with the community and bring in volunteers. For example, we have a church that does, they're called the Muffin Ladies, and they bring muffins. I think it's Thursday mornings, and they're at 7 every morning. The only time they're not is if the school closes or there's a blizzard. And I'll tell you, that's the day where those kids are hopping out of bed, come down to the lobby and get a muffin, get juice, and get to school. And so that's something that our community engagement coordinator does, is tries to build those relationships with our faith communities, with other volunteers in the community. What else about Steve O'Neill? That's kind of the basic, because I want to make sure to get to stepping on up. And then we have St. Francis, which is another supportive housing unit that is on 2nd Street, just west of CHUM. It's the old, I believe it was a Best Western motel. And they have 44 units of permanent supportive housing for 55 plus. And it's really kind of neat because some of these people have experienced homelessness for a long time, and now they have found a safe place to be. And so it's not a full apartment because they don't have a kitchen in there, but they can have a crock pot and they can have a microwave. And then the lobby, there's other things like a big electric fry pan thing, just other ways to cook food. And then some churches bring in meals that can be reheated as well. There's always coffee on. There's usually the TV's on, and people from the community, residents and guests of residents will kind of pop in. They're all expected to check in before they go to their visiting whoever they're visiting, the guests. And I just wanted to share, there's one woman there who's lived there, I think, since we started, and she has a big golden doodle, and she's completely sober. She's just happy to have a place to be. I really love that the residents will pop in to see the staff in their office, which is actually one of the rooms. And so I'm not saying there's no challenges at St. Francis, because there's always going to be challenges when you're housing folks who had experienced homelessness for a long time. I think something that a lot of people don't know is, when you get housed, and then all of a sudden it's quiet. You were used to kind of walking the streets. You've dealt with a lot of trauma, maybe, and you haven't been able to address that trauma because you haven't been housed. And so you don't have the resources to do that. And so sometimes when people get housed, that's when that permanent supportive piece really comes into play, because that's when people are going to actually have time to process some of the things that they've gone through their whole life. So that's where that supportive model is really important and kind of comes into play at both Steve O'Neill and St. Francis. So I'm continually in awe of the staff that work in both of those programs, and I'm really proud of what they're doing and the support that they're offering to those individuals living there. I talked about the food shelf. CHUM also does advocacy. I talked a little bit about that. The Pathways for Home Act has been a part of our legislative platform. Wednesday is Homeless Day on the Hill. So if anyone wants to come down, they could reach out to our CHUM office. I think Pat Benson is heading that up. I'm not sure if there's still room on the bus. I don't think there is, but a bunch of us are going down to the Capitol to kind of advocate for the Pathways for Home Act, which I said would provide millions and millions of dollars for shelter capital. So currently there's 155 beds in Duluth, and we're often at capacity. So we need more shelter and we need more housing. And so that's a really important piece as far as working to address this problem. There's finite resources available. And so that's an important piece of the work that we do as well. And so you can always email your representatives, email legislators, and kind of if you feel inclined to do that, it's always a good thing to do. So, and then future goals for CHUM. You may have heard, it was pretty exciting. We got $2 million from Congress to do a shelter expansion, which is really needed. mostly for, we need more shelter beds, like I said. And now we're pushing for 2.5 more million dollars from the state, because quite frankly, that's just the amount that it's gonna take to build that shelter. Just given where we're at in our world right now with inflation and construction costs, that's what we're gonna need. And so that's what we're pushing for. So I'll talk about stepping on up a little bit. Are there any more questions right now? Yeah.
What are you looking at for a location for the expansion of the shelter? Do you see the need primarily as an expansion where you're currently located? Or, you know, where do you see the best need for that expansion?
That's a really good question. This funding would be to expand the shelter where we are now. So we will go up and over towards 2nd Street. And someone was really smart, because I know many, many years ago, there was a fire and they had to rebuild CHUM. Maybe some of you remember that. I don't, I wasn't here then, but someone was really smart and they built it structurally so that someday they could build up. So there's the structural components there to allow us to build up. And someone was a forward thinker, and I'm really appreciative to whoever that was. So hopefully that answers your question. Not to say that we don't need even more shelters in other locations, but that's the plan right now. Yeah. So I'll just start with some guiding principles of stepping on up. I talked about just that everyone deserves a safe and affordable place to call home that's appropriate for their needs, right? Meeting them where they're at. Another guiding principle is that criminalizing homelessness or trying to hide homelessness are not a good use of our collective resources, and they have detrimental effects on people's health. So we know it's out there, so we wanna address the problem. We don't want to turn our heads and do the not in my back door kind of thing, and we want to make sure that we're addressing these issues. And when we talk about the collective resources and detrimental effects on people's health, if we're not addressing homelessness, you know, it's really going to cost more money in the long run, I would think, because of the healthcare system and the health needs and things like that. The public health and safety problems caused by chronic unsheltered homelessness must be addressed and mitigated. So, you know, there's just a lot of health problems that come with experiencing homelessness. And there's also safety problems for people living maybe in encampments, and maybe safety problems for those people who are the neighbors of the people living in encampments. So we need to address that. And then another guiding principle is communities most impacted by homelessness need to have strong voices in the process. So we want people with lived experience to be at the table, and we want to hear what they have to say, and we want to hear, you know, what they think would be the most effective. And so some of those people include people experiencing homelessness, BIPOC communities, peoples with disability, and people in recovery. So we really want those individuals at the table. That's really important. And another guiding principle is a collaborative and systematic approach by providers and local government is our best chance at addressing chronic unsheltered homelessness and getting people off the streets. We talked about that. CHUM can't do it alone. Damiano can't do it alone. The county can't do it alone. Churches can't do it alone. Faith community, we have to work together. And so that's one of the guiding principles of it. Did you have your hand up? Oh.
Thank you for sharing all the information about it. I'm wondering, I know that we get eager about how can we help? And do you go to the monthly housing kind of coalition meetings, and would that be a good place for us to go? Or are you aware of the housing summit on March 30th? And would you invite people from here to attend that as a place to get more information about where the needs are? I mean, you're doing a great job of telling us what's available, But of course, you know, they never match up, and, you know, we've got issues with parking garages, the city is working on figuring that out, and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. So would that housing summit on March 30th be a good place for people to go, and could they attend that monthly, multi-housing
I would imagine,
meeting?
I would imagine that would be a good place to go. I haven't had the capacity to jump on those meetings. But I've heard that they're really good and really informative. So definitely you could check that out. Yeah. Thank you. So that's a little bit about the kind of the philosophy or the guiding principles behind stepping on up. I'll kind of get into the phases a little bit because I think are we running short on time a little bit? 5 minutes? Okay.
One last question.
Yep.
Is there any good municipality participation between, say, Hermantown and Duluth for services? Hermantown being kind of a suburb community. You can get your house foreclosed on down CHUM. But does Hermantown provide any coordinated?
You know, I don't have the answer to that question, but I could get that. I could look into that for you.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry about that. I'll talk just really briefly about, so phase one, so stepping on up has 3 phases. So in short, the first phase is where we're going to have sanctioned living zones. So authorized outdoor living zones. And that's where we'll have a designated area. It's meant to minimize and eventually hopefully eliminate illegal outdoor living zones.
Did you find a place yet?
I think that we do. I think I heard that we do have one area. And so that'll be coming up this summer, right? And so the idea there is that it's not a permanent solution, but it's to get people to camp there so that they're safe and reducing harm. So we'll have like Biffies, Sharps containers, Narcan, police presence, right? There's going to be a community covenant where for rules like an intentional community, water, food resources. And so the idea is in phase 1 is to have those and then move into phase 2. So another part of phase 1 is Safe Bay, which is a similar situation, but people living out of their cars. So a safe place for people to park where they're not going to get booted, but have all the resources there, right? And then phase 2 is more of that stabilization phase. So we're leveraging the connections that were built in phase 1, and then moving into the stabilization phase in phase 2, really connecting them to resources. Shelter Next is going to be an indoor living site, kind of utilizing maybe some industry buildings that aren't being utilized. There's a lot of empty buildings. And so I think the idea is to have 4 sites with 25 units in each of those buildings. And those are going to be staffed 24/7. They're going to be very service rich. There's going to be a big need for volunteer and community engagement in that piece. And then once guests kind of demonstrate progress in sobriety and addressing mental health, that's when phase 3 will come in with the housing. So that's kind of like the short version.